Steam locomotives have been part of daily life in South Africa for well over 100 years. They've been largely taken for granted. Noisy machines which move goods and people from A to B. But now the spotlight is on them, and they are caught in a tug-of-war. Loved by some, regarded as uneconomic relics by others, they cannot be ignored. In the midst of all the nostalgia, the decision-making and the publicity, are the few people to whom these glamorous machines are also workhorses. For South Africa is still a working steam country. Drivers and firemen are paid to work the engines. Steam enthusiasts from all parts of the world pay a fortune to come and watch them doing so. South Africa is one of the very few places left where you can still see a steam engine simply doing its job. But it won't be so for long. Progress is relentless. Soon the sight and sound of a steam locomotive working a regular train up a heavy grade of steam travel. Among the most glossy are the railway's steam safaris, one of which began in Cape Town in November 1983. The passengers came from far afield. Germany left Cape Town behind an electric locomotive. Steam engines are not allowed inside the station. The locomotive, which really opened the safari, was aptly chosen. A 25 NC, the biggest and most powerful of all. She was coupled to the train at Belleville. These engines still work mainline trains in the Karoo, thundering through the night and shattering the peace of tiny line-side towns. But the journey on this balmy first evening would be a gentle one through the gracious winelands of the Southern Cape. A new day with new locomotives. A Garrett piloted by a Class 24. A steam safari takes a lot of organizing. 12 days of travel, 70-odd passengers to feed and look after, and 27 different locomotives to have ready on cue. Drivers, firemen, water and coal to be laid on. All this, and still the difficulty of fitting in with traffic on the line and keeping to schedule. The route was to cover the length and breadth of the country, a journey of nearly 4,000 kilometers. The first lap ended at the little resort town of Knysna. Knysna stands at the end of the well-known branch line from George. The petite 24th class locomotives work this route regularly. They always have the same crews, men who care about them and love to show them off. No less than 3 immaculate engines would take the safari back to George. In steam terminology, the train was triple-headed. Presumably, enjoyment was likewise trebled. No well-run steam special is complete without a so-called photo run-past, an event specially staged to give the passengers a chance to photograph their train from the trackside. Gert Notnagel, the technical manager on board, had the task of selecting the best sites.
That is just a matter of knowing the roads where the best part is for pictures. It all depends on the time, of course, that you get to a spot like where there's a good picture can be taken. But I think that is mostly decided on by knowing the road.
One of the places chosen for a run past was the well-known Caimans River Bridge. Essential to any good run past are great quantities of smoke and noise, the things that so obviously set a steam engine apart from an electric or diesel. But smoke and noise are only produced by an engine working hard, so run pasts usually take place on upgrades. A photo run past is no idle business. After dropping off its load of eager enthusiasts, armed with cameras and tape recorders, the train reverses some distance down the line. As soon as everybody has settled into position, the train accelerates and charges past at full speed, making as much smoke and fuss as possible. No one seems to mind being rained on by soot.
They just love it.
This was the second of a total of 26 run pasts. Having retrieved its passengers, the train headed inland towards George and the Outeniqua Mountains beyond. For centuries, these mountains presented a formidable barrier to all forms of traffic. Then the Montague Pass was built, linking George with Oudtshoorn. The steam engines, which once tackled the 1 in 40 gradients of the route, were the much-loved Garretts. In the heyday of steam, their exhaust beats ricocheted off these mountains, and their smoke hung over the hard-won miles behind them. There was challenge, excitement, and plenty of theatre. But today, powerful diesels climb smugly up to the little Karoo, their unmodulated throb revealing little about how hard they're working. On the afternoon of the safari, steam gave a belated encore. A GM AM Garrett was double-headed with a Class 24. The spectators were already positioned on the opposite hillside. They are the enthusiasts who chase trains to photograph them, rather than actually travel on them. Among steam lovers, they are known as greisers. The Otaniquas reach their full height and then flatten out gradually into a narrow plateau known as the Little Karoo, bordered on the north by the Great Swartberg Range. This is ostrich country, and Oudtshoorn's reputation today rests far more heavily on these oversized birds than on a once splendid steam railway. At Oudtshoorn, double-headed 19Ds took over, engines which traditionally worked the section of line from here to Port Elizabeth. The next lap would be a long one, 440 kilometers eastwards from Oudtshoorn to the sea. South Africa is a waterless land, and areas like this, in the rain shadow of high mountains, are particularly arid. The water is life to steam engines, producing the very stuff that propels them along.
Our bigger problems today is now with the phasing out of steam on some of the regions, of course, is water and coal facilities. Water we can still overcome by using a feeder tank onto a locomotive, but of course at some places the coal stage was already taken off, so we had to do that with machines or by hand.
But at other stations, such as Willowmore, the coaling and watering facilities had not yet been dismantled. Trapped between two high mountain chains running from east to west, moving through country that was all but empty, the safari passengers could be forgiven for feeling isolated, encapsulated in a fragile shell of civilized living. Good food, good wine, everything was on board. Outside, mile upon mile of very little. Port Elizabeth, South Africa's third largest port, and the place where the 1820 settlers landed, is also the terminus of a narrow gauge line built to serve the fruit industry of the Langkloof Valley. The rails are 2 feet apart, compared to South Africa's normal 3'6", which is in itself narrow compared with the 4' 8.5" gauge used in most parts of the world. So this is a narrow gauge line. Nonetheless, it plays its part in the economy of the country, in industry, and in tourism. On this Saturday morning, the safari passengers joined the locals on the famous Apple Express on its weekly joyride to Luri, 46 kilometers inland. Although most of the traffic on the line is handled by diesels, this little train is exclusively steam, and its potential as a tourist attraction hasn't been ignored. Van Staten's Bridge is the highest railway bridge in South Africa. Another run past was laid on here, so the passengers walked across the bridge and found positions for photographs on the opposite bank.
Shot actually.
The next leg of the journey was along the main line from Port Elizabeth to Jare, and then to Kimberley. The number, variety, and sheer spruced-up showiness of the engines used on the safari bordered on pageantry. Engines rarely used together were specially double-headed, like this pair, a Class 12AR and a 15AR. At Cookhouse, they were exchanged for diesels, which were only sneaked onto the train at night, when time could be gained without sacrificing aesthetic pleasure.
We did use electric and diesel power, but that was only for overnight runs, and of course it was just impossible to get the steam to work the train.
Jare is a small town, but it's an important mainline junction, and it's never quiet. The sounds of steam continue throughout the night. The safari had arrived here very early behind diesel. Its next locomotive was already being prepared, the illustrious Class 16E. This one, number 858, is the only working example left of a mere 6 originally built. They were exclusive prestige locomotives, built to haul crack passenger trains at high speeds.
Very, very nice locomotive. We had a beautiful trip behind that locomotive from Jare to Kimberley.
Lean and lithe, with 6-foot driving wheels, the 16E can easily reach 160 kilometers per hour.
It depends on the maximum speed of the section. but she can run pretty fast, I would say.
Number 858 is only steamed for specials nowadays. She spends most of her time standing silently at Beaconsfield Shed in Kimberley, a retired pedigree racehorse. Beaconsfield Locomotive Depot is one of the biggest steam sheds in the country. It is home depot to many of the engines which work the 300-kilometre section between Kimberley and Jare, one of the few busy main lines still worked largely by steam. Also normally on static display outside the shed foreman's office is number 3511, the last surviving member of the 25th class. Her characteristic feature is her ability to economize on water. 5 huge cooling fans on top of the tender condense the exhaust steam back into water for reuse in the boiler. For the safari, she was brought back to life. Getting a hibernating locomotive back into action is hard work. For many hours, number 3511 was indulgently fussed over, checked and oiled, cleaned and polished, for she had to look her best on this occasion. Also being prepared for the safari at Beaconsfield was another very special locomotive, popularly known as the Red Devil. This is the Class 26, which was to take over from the 25 at Warrenton. Rebuilt from a Class 25 NC with modifications to improve efficiency, she is essentially an experimental locomotive. When she was commissioned, it was hoped that she might represent a reprieve for dying steam in South Africa. Number 3511 was the subject of much admiration as she backed onto her train. She was built for conditions like these, hot, dry and dusty. Built to go 1,100 kilometers without fresh water. There were once 90 of these machines. This is the only one left, alone in the world. Because her steam is returned to the tender, instead of being thrust out into the atmosphere, number 3511 doesn't chuff like a normal engine. Instead, she issues only the high-pitched whine produced by the turbine in the smoke box.
3511 is also a very nice locomotive, but the passengers is not very impressed with it because there is no beat, it's just a whistle. For sound recordings, they don't like that. They like a beat, and of course for photos, black smoke. So that is why we only used it on a very short section between Kimberley and Warrington. And what I got against it myself, it's very filthy.
Her boiler certificate expires in 1991, and it's anyone's guess whether after this she will ever run again. The Red Devil was ready and eager to take over at Warrington. Something of a show-off, she's both fast and powerful. Modifications have reduced her appetite for coal and water and increased her power by 50%.
It's a good locomotive. It's a very nice locomotive. And of course, being the only one on our transport services, it is something special.
She coasts into Freiburg, scarcely out of breath. A bright red steam engine pulling a trainload of eccentric foreigners doesn't pull into this quiet little town every day. By this time, the safari had covered a total distance of 2,170 kilometers. 1,740 kilometers lay ahead. The journey continued behind a kaleidoscope of different engines, each one as smartly turned out as the next. While no enthusiast disapproves of the running of specials like this one, Some of them feel they are not representative of the way things are. Specially spruced up locomotives and specially laid on events, they complain, are but pale imitations of the real thing. But the real thing has already disappeared from most parts of South Africa. And in the near future, specials will provide steam lovers with their only opportunity of viewing and photographing engines at work. Here, the train is skirting the border of the Kruger National Park. It would be unfortunate to be so near to such an attraction and not be able to see it. And indeed, a trip to the park was on the schedule. Complaints that the food was just too good and too much. With a supply that included 470 kilograms of meat, 150 kilograms of fish, and 2,000 eggs in his refrigerator car at the rear of the train, he kept the complaints coming in thick and fast. The last day of the 1983 Steam Safari, and with only 430 kilometers to go, nostalgia was beginning to mount. The whole operation had been conducted in a very efficient way, with every advertised locomotive being run and every one of them turning in a star performance. At the same time, the safari was integrated smoothly into the complicated pattern of traffic on very busy lines. People who work with steam usually love their jobs, and the passengers weren't the only enthusiasts on board.
I just love steam locomotives. I've been working with them for 35 years, and I hope that I can stay with steam locomotives until the end of my time. A steam locomotive has got character because it can speak to you. The harder you hit it, the harder it talks to you, and it never fails. It comes back all the time. It keeps talking to you. And I don't mind whether it's a small one or a big one, just as long as it's black with a lot of sound and black smoke.
Witbank was the scene of the last locomotive change. A Class 12 AR and a Class 15 CA were coupled up for the last leg behind steam. Germiston, once the busy hub of steam workings on the reef, is now only a depot for shunting and trip work. It was the end of the road for steam on this safari, and home for these two dapper locomotives. A wave and a whistle, and the pageant was over.